look at the slides, okay?
That's good. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, cool. Okay, good morning, everybody. And it's good to see some familiar faces and nice to meet everybody who hadn't met me before. So my name is Wendy. I'm a postdoc researcher. I would present our research study today. Is entitled Nature for Students' Life, the impact of outdoor greenness on the mental well-being and on the chronic absenteeism. I would like to acknowledge the research support from the Liverpool Center for Nature Recovery, the eco-flourishing thing from the Oxford Health Biomedical Research Center. So this is the main team members of the study. I would like to start talking about green space and children's mental health. And then the definition of green space adopted in the study refers to an area of grass, trees, and vegetation that's set apart for recreational or scientific purposes in the otherwise urban environment. So within the current evidence, there were some good examples, as in how does the green space help improve the cognitive development in the attention restoration? How does that help with children's stress reduction, emotional resilience, self-discipline, and increase their physical activity? There's one study particularly standing out. They conduct one-year study in Barcelona from 36 schools with school children aged from 10 to 7. So they assess a one-year period, how does their cognitive development, cognitive performance improved, and they tested this positive association. And they also tested the benefits of the green space were partially mediated by reduced exposure to the air pollution. And in the UK, there was one study adopted the data before the pandemic, and they identified the benefits of woodlands to children's cognitive development and mental health. But nevertheless, the current kind of systematic reviews or current literature still argue that compared to the studies on the adult population's mental health, there's still kind of limited amount or limited focus on children. And some of the literature review even argue the evidence provided for children's mental health and the green space is rather of low quality. So in the study here, we're arguing the school are natural settings for which nearly all children and adolescents. And the schools, they obviously varies in size, in their resources, in their educational focuses. But what's important here is students, they do spend the most significant proportion of their day at school. So they build their key relationship with peers, with the school staffs. And the school also connect them to the broader communities, like through families, activity clubs, and etc. Schools also help them, but on the other hand, with all these benefits, school also pose students with some interpersonal risks that potentially, for instance, bullying experience or substantial use that may lead to poor mental health. There were limited amounts of evidence suggest that spending time in a green space would help actually the children's mental well-being and reduce the symptoms of depression. This positive effects remains even after controlled for age, for gender, family income, and also other socioeconomic backgrounds. So suggesting this positive relationship is legitimate. But nonetheless, the school outdoor greenness is quite vital, but is still relatively understudied. And then the other kind of dimension is quite stands out that we are looking at is the student attendance. And people here probably know that it's a crucial factor, including academic achievement and for students' overall well-being. So two numbers I put here. In the current academic year for the England-funded states primary, secondary, and special schools, they recorded this persistent absence rate as 18.6%, which is quite high number. And then I put next to it is Oxfordshire average, but it's for 2022, 2023, this number is 26.9. And now it's being slightly reduced, but it's still over 20%. So this study we propose here is looking at this triangle relationship. Is that from exposed to the greenness in the school grounds? How does that actually matters, or does that not matters to the students' mental well-being? and how does that matters to their persistent absence rate, and if the mental well-being is a mediator for this relationship to the absence rate. The research gap this study trying to fill starts with the spatial social disparities in exposure to the school greenness. So this need further investigation according to the current studies, and especially for areas that are relatively deprived. And in the current studies mentioned briefly before, there is still lack of focus on school-based greenness. So there were some researchers talking about home exposure or neighborhood green space exposure, but given the fact that children spend significant amounts of time is still at school, the school is a natural setting for them. We hadn't notified any studies that investigate the relationship of the persistent absence rate and the greenness post-COVID, especially. There also limited research exists on, so how does the specific features of the school greenness and their association with mental health? This one study published in 2021 on the woodlands and the children's mental health is probably one of the handful evidence that we got. And then the current several literature reviews argued the current evidence or studies, they still have some methodological gaps and some inconsistent results that reported. So here's our research question. We started by looking at how does the relationship between the school outdoor greenness and mental well-being vary across the different socio-economic neighborhoods. And then we're going to talk about potentially how specific features of green space in schools, grounds, for instance, the tree cover, the woodland, the grassland, the playground, and the gardens influence their children's mental well-being. And the third research question is, what is the relationship between this outdoor greenness and their chronic absenteeism? So I will start by talking about what greenness we put in the schools yet. So at the moment, I was in the process of data processing. I already processed for all the greenness, but not the land use type for the school grounds. So I would like to introduce you first what I processed so far. Start with the enhanced vegetation index. So this is for people not really familiar with this. It's a satellite-based measurement that shows how green the area is. It captured the vegetation area presented on the ground. It's compared to other vegetation index. It's slightly more sensitive in the capturedness, and is also less affected by the atmospheric interference compared. The process starting from mapping out the school grounds, data sourced from the OpenStreetMap and OS Green Space Master Layer, and I use a satellite image with resolution of 0.5 meters by 0.5 meters resolution. The illustration today will basically looking at the 2023 like a wave data. So I captured all the school grounds match the time frame where the survey data is available. The survey data I use is from a survey called the Oxwell Student Survey, which is a comprehensive and annual online survey assess the well-being of children. They captured age to 9 to 18. It conducted mainly by the Professor Mina Faisal's team from the Department of Psychiatry. So they collaborate mostly with schools, local authorities. The survey covers various aspects of students' life, that including the mental health, anxiety levels, experience of bullying, loneliness, school experience, or if they have substantial use or sleep patterns, online safety, if they're eating healthily, and how often they exercise, and etc. The mapping of these school grounds that match with the schools that has a survey records of mental health measurements, and I filter out with records have missing values, and some of the records doesn't have the attendance rate. So after that, we end up capture 62 schools. The main two sites where I circled in the map are Oxfordshire and Liverpool. I also used the tree canopy cover from the National Tree Map and the tree cover layer from the National Tree Map to calculate for each school grounds how many trees is within the school and what percentage is a tree canopy cover for that. So here, this is what the enhanced vegetation EVI within school grounds look like on the top left. And then on the top right is the average number of trees in the school grounds by local authorities. And if we put a simple kind of comparison between the two main sites we're looking at, so which is Oxfordshire and Liverpool, and we can see actually Oxfordshire doing slightly better in like number of trees within the schools, or like greenness index and a percentage tree canopy cover. And also it has less variations between the school grounds in the greenness change. Liverpool, on the other hand, is doing lower in all the three like greenness measures. It also have a higher variation between the school grounds, as in how green the school grounds is. So this is just some preliminary how the greenness looks like present to you here. And then we're looking at another dimension. So this is the persistent absence rate for all the study sites in the Oxwell where we have the data. And this is average number we're going to be looking at. And we can see that actually, as mentioned before, the persistent absence rate is actually a concerning issue. And we can see that over here, the Oxfordshire is ranked number 2 among the study regions with an average of 28.8. But it also can be noted that there's not much difference between the two main sites, as in Oxfordshire and Liverpool. So how to investigate this relationship? What I'm doing here is to linking the environmental exposure at the school level and building the data linkage on the school level mental and well-being, students' attendance rates, and a link to the school level number of trees, their canopy density, and will add it out to access to the green and blue spaces and a specific land use in the school grounds. So this is how the student mental well-being in the schools from the data set looks like. So here I present to you the short version of the Warwick-Edinburgh mental well-being scale. So this one has 7 statements. The full version has 14 statements. If for each statement, it's gonna ask you over to 1 to 5 scale. So 1 means none of the time, 5 means all of the time. So overall score gonna be range from 7 to 35, and higher the score, the better the mental well-being. It covers things like, are you feeling optimistic, feeling useful, feeling relaxed, feeling close to others? Can you think clearly? Are you able to deal with problems or able to make up your own mind? But this is not for clinical uses, but there are studies showing that if below 20 is possible low mental well-being, and that it has a hint of the depression or anxiety symptoms. And then the category is like till from 20 to 27 is moderate well-being, over 28 is higher. So what we can see here, all the study sites we have, Oxfordshire and Milton Keynes, they have relatively higher proportion of students with high like mental well-being. So it's around 53 and a 51%. And then they also have smaller proportion of students with low mental well-being. Bracknell Forest, they really stands out with a large proportion of students in a median category, like a median student well-being. And they also have relatively small proportion in a low category. And Liverpool, on the other hand, they have a slightly more evenly spread percentage between the median and high categories. And then on the right-hand side, I present Morris I index result for this well-being scores test. So this index is showing to assess if there's a spatial autocorrelation, quantifying if between the school grounds there are similar values of well-being scores at different location that cluster to each other. So this is 0.15, but not significant at 5% level, but significant at 10% level. It kind of indicates there's a potential, but very weak positive clustering. And there's a potential for using some spatial models as in consider where the schools are into the regression models. So here is some very preliminary results. How does the tree canopy or the greenness matter to chronic absenteeism? So here we can see amongst all the models tested, Some of them I aggregate the survey data to school level, and they run the multi-level modeling, which is model number 4 that contained both student level and the school level information. And I tested for all the 3 greenness index I got at the moment, so which is number of trees and a canopy coverage and a greenness. So we detected that the higher canopy coverage is associated with higher absenteeism, but this would mitigate it as well-being increases. What does this mean? It means that students with higher well-being scores, they will be less affected by, will be less negatively affected. And also, interestingly, the more trees is also linked to higher absenteeism, especially when the well-being score is low. At the school level, when we aggregate the survey data to school level and tested the relationship with the greenness, there's no clear relationship between this greenness and the chronic absenteeism. But when we keep both of the level and do a multi-level regression, the higher greenness is contributes to decrease the chronic absenteeism rate. It also has no interaction with mental well-being scores. So the model here I controlled for students level social demographics, that's including genders, their age year group, if they have previous chronic health conditions, if they have trouble sleep, if they have bullying experience, their perception of safety, urban-rural difference, and school type. In schools where students report better well-being, the negative effect of the high tree canopy of the absenteeism is reduced. So meaning absenteeism decreases when the well-being is higher. This is also interesting as we noticed that the tree canopy coverage actually have more impact than the number of trees, and it works differently in the direction of greenness, which means apart from we need to specify within the greenness different kind of the greenness, like for instance, potentially grassland or woodland, specific type of greenness in the schools work differently to children's mental health. To their chronic absenteeism, sorry. And then here is some preliminary findings. Does greenness matter to mental health? I think that one of the takeaway we can kind of like conclude from this preliminary results is the benefit of the greenness on mental health is stronger in areas with higher deprivation. And it means as deprivation decreases, well-being gets slightly worse. We also noticed that there's some weak evidence that mental well-being scores are influenced directly by the neighboring schools, but these differences are quite minimal. So what does this tell us? If we're gonna have some takeaway messages? More trees and more tree canopy in schools are actually not helping with students' chronic absenteeism according to the school data. But we're also saying like students with better mental well-being, they are less impacted by this. And the greener school grounds are slightly reduced. So when the school grounds is greener, but not by planting more trees, it would help to reduce absenteeism, but this also doesn't influence by students' mental well-being status. This relationship between outdoor school greenness and mental well-being is sort of localized according to the preliminary results and not driven by the broader spatial spillover effects. And also what the first model telling us is like the second model telling us is in the deprived areas, greenness in the school grounds matters more for students' mental well-being. So what is the next step for this study? Because we detected there are different impacts. So the EBI work positively, but trees and a canopy work negatively for the absenteeism. They also seems to have some negative association with mental well-being. We need to enrich the greenness side to mapping out the different type of land use within the school grounds, as in specify the playground, grassland, woodland, gardens, and etc. Also needs to detect the regional differences between the two main sites that we have the data, which gonna be Liverpool and Oxfordshire. It also needs to conduct the sensitivity analysis, as in how, like, is that 300 meters around each school grounds, or is 500 or 1 mile as in catchment area for the greenness for each school ground. Ideally, if things work out, we wish to develop as a long-term plan some deep dive case studies for this. We wish to provide some evidence for some following policy framework for the EIP, for the Green Infrastructure Intervention, National Planning Policy Framework, and working together to reduce or improve the student attendance. So this is the main reference for what I'm talking about today. I will be really looking forward to any suggestions and questions. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you, Wendy. Really interesting and nice to see those results coming through. I know we've been discussing the plans for a while, but it's nice to see some early analysis. I'll just kick off with a question. I was curious about you're getting overall a very ambiguous results about tree cover, or possibly even negative, unexpectedly negative results about that. But you're seeing a strong, or a relatively strong message emerging in more deprived areas that in terms of absenteeism. So I wonder whether you can restructure the analysis to particularly look at deprived areas and maybe see how this relationship with tree cover, etc., plays out in more deprived areas. It's possible that what we're seeing is that in sort of more prosperous areas, it doesn't seem to make much difference. Kids get greenness at home and their gardens and things, and it doesn't make much difference. But in deprived areas, it's adding a significant effect there. So it'd be nice to dive into that more deprived areas further as well, I think.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds amazing. I think I present to you the IMD kind of like a percentage of the case studies we got. And then we actually got quite a lot, which is 10. And then we can sort of like focus on the slightly more deprived area.
Okay, great. Okay. Other questions? Sorry, I forgot your name again, but Palku.
Yes, sorry, Adam. Wendy, so I'm wondering if you consider the effect of blue spaces, because, for example, if I'm not mistaken, Bournemouth area and Poole had the lowest tree coverage, but the highest mental health ratings. And one thing which feels like it could be attributable to the presence of blue spaces. And obviously, when you have blue spaces, you cannot have tree canopy, so it doesn't work together. So I wonder if you consider, or if you plan to consider, the effects of blue spaces on your analysis.
Okay. Thanks so much for the suggestion. Yeah, I think I can take a look, because the school grounds, I sort of mapped them all out now. So it seems to me that to be honest, I didn't see my school grounds that contains like a noticeable amount of blue spaces, but I can see and kind of like, because the plan is to using the habitat land use maps to clip the school grounds, and if there are water body in the school grounds, that's gonna be captured in the land use. The next step, it would be captured. Yeah, but at the moment I didn't see. Usually it is like it's a giant building, a small grounds, and they have some trees, or the trees on the kind of like outside, around the buildings, and then in the backyard. So it just like
I do understand your point, but what I was trying to say is like solely by the virtue of living somewhere seaside could kind of like mediate that relationship. I meant.
You mean like where the school is located by the coastal line?
Yeah, or the population is located like in seaside cities.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I can share some literature with you, Wendy. It's already been published that higher well-being scores are recorded by the sea and the coast.
Okay, yeah. That probably can be explored with Liverpool, but in the survey data, we don't have where the students live, though. We only have the location of the school grounds. Yeah.
But that could be a good first proxy. You could imagine eliminating or separating out schools that are within 5 kilometers of the coast and seeing whether you see an effect there. Yeah. Okay, Karen.
Hi, yeah, thanks. It's really interesting. Thank you. I'm Woodland Trust, and we've got a tree equity project, which it made me think there's really good links between what you're doing. I'll put a link in the chat. And we're also doing, well, because it tends to be that poorer, more deprived areas have less trees. So we're trying to address that. And we also have our new tree equity challenge on our Green Tree Schools Award. So it's kind of educating schools about that tree equity difference and how they can help to readdress the balance. So I'll put a few links in the chat just in case they're of any use.
Thank you.
Okay.
Roger?
Wendy, thanks so much for that. That was great. Incidentally, I grew up on the South Coast, so I'm wondering between a link between absenteeism and blue space, because if I wasn't in school, guess what? I was on the beach. And I noticed earlier on Brighton, really low absenteeism, but shingle beach, rather than sand. Anyway, that isn't what I wanted to say. What I was going to say was I wondered with the student wellbeing survey, where you've got high absenteeism, how do you account for the fact that often those surveys are mediated through school? So maybe if kids are missing out on school, you're less likely to find their data in the surveys. Have you got a way around that, or any way to mitigate against that effect?
Oh, yeah, that's a very good question. There's a way that we can slightly mitigate this. According to the survey team, they told me in the survey, they will ask the students how many sessions they missed during for schools. But then also given the fact that survey only conducted for the portion of the students within that school, but we can get that part of the data to mitigate this school level absenteeism. I do understand the question is the student who is persistent absent, there's a higher chance they actually didn't answer that. And that goes to the question I can also see for each school, what's the response number and the students number, and then we can see the percentage as in if that represents the situation of the school. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much for that answer. And of course, as I was listening, the other thing I was thinking about was, yes, you've got the presence of greenness or trees, but of course, what is the connection between those kids with the trees? You could hypothesize that if they've been involved in planting trees, in looking after them, care of them, studying the nature there's going to be much greater connection than if the trees are just things which happen to be on the school site, but there's not really in the curriculum or the life of the school much connection with them. Thank you.
Hey, Kira?
Hey, Wendy, that was fascinating. Just this is going to be horribly anecdotal after your beautifully scientific presentation, but it took me back to when I was at school. I went to quite a rough school, and we had a lot of trees around us, but it was horrible because it was dark, it was gloomy, we were in these prefab kind of post-war things, and the damp and the wet that would drip from them. And I'm wondering if when you do these detailed case studies, which sound absolutely fascinating, whether that proximity might be something to look at, to make sure that trees are located perhaps in the right places, not too close to buildings, not cutting out light, not kind of having other effects that might kind of explain some of these, this kind of bizarre, inverse relationship between having more trees and higher absenteeism. So yeah, I just wonder if there's some kind of detailed thing going on there that might explain that.
Actually, when I talked to Kim, which is one of the co-collaborators, she also told me the same kind of concerns as in if there are a lot of trees or the canopy is actually quite high around certain part of school, the children that would actually afraid to go there. And then I hadn't think about the possible reasons for that, but now the data product, I think they were also combined to what people were asking in the comments. It's so what I used to map out the tree canopy cover is relatively kind of higher resolution at the moment. So we got exactly how big the canopy for the trees, but the data product only captured the trees over 3 meters tall, if that makes sense. So it's 3 meters. Everything below that is not being captured. And I'm mapping out the school grounds and the tree canopy cover. But then it's a very good question, as in the next step for me is to think about the sensitivity analysis, as in how big the catchment area I need to capture around that school grounds that represent the situation of their greenness. I was also thinking when I talked to the Natural History Museum people, they were saying like they actually some school grounds, the actual kind of greenness situation, you need to go there and test it out if the kind of mapping actually makes sense. So I was thinking in the later stage, I will need to go out to the field to test that out. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, Kira. And I wonder whether there's some proximity thing, like if trees are within 10 meters of the school, they're actually the light effects and the darkening effects are more negative, whereas if they're further away, the aesthetic effects and things might be positive. So there may be a distance effect there that with your precise data you may be able to look at.
Mm.
Okay, any more questions and comments? Okay, yes, go ahead.
Hi, it's Caroline. My question was about whether trees, especially newly planted trees on school premises, ended up being vandalized at all. Now, this will partly depend on whether the school premises are actually locked up after school is over. But given how many newly planted trees are vandalized, that might be some sort of a measure of how some of the students reacted, but of course those would be the students who are actually on school, in school. So I think the point about getting people to nurture trees in school is very important, but that's also possibly a way of driving a distinction between the nurturing and the people who want to take their feelings about life out on something that won't fight back.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing point. Our colleagues also mentioned they were not only the trees being vandalized off, but then also it's like newly planted, like a school community gardens. They also gonna be fenced off. But it just like the thing is, the secondary data, I don't really have the data at the moment, as in represents how they interact with the trees or the greenness actually in the school grounds. I think that's also a limitation of the secondary data. But then it's kind of present you a baseline, a first step, as in, and then maybe add on more next layer or next step.
Okay.
So you can do some deep
Tatiana?
dive. Sorry.
Great, that's thank you very much. I look forward to that. It wasn't
Tatiana,
intended as
are
a
you
criticism. I was wondering what everybody else had experienced.
Hi, yeah, sorry, I was just going to ask, I understand that you're focusing on the school grounds, but I wondered if there was influence on the neighbouring area and how much sealed surface to green space or trees or at green active travel there was, because in other studies I've noticed it's the green active travel has quite positive effects, and I wondered if that was possibly within the scope of your study. I understand that you've got huge area to cover, but yeah, I just wondered.
Yeah, so that's actually I mentioned it was a good study conducted in Barcelona. They have the green active travels. That would be realized because they did survey and a calculation to ask the parents of their kids, their like exposure to greenness on their way to school, on their way back. I can't possibly reflect that at the moment, but we can do the sensitivity analysis I mentioned before. Adjust our catchment area that try to reflect it. So for instance, if we match the catchment area for the school catchment area, and then potentially we would able to reflect it, their greenness on their way and back to school, because the catchment area is like pretty much you can roughly tell this is area where the students live if they go to this school. So that's kind of like one resolution in kind of solutions on the table at the moment. Yeah.
okay? And Karen?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention about Caroline's point about vandalism of school trees, because we give out a lot of free trees to schools. And we very much try to do right tree, right place, as people were saying, not too close to school buildings and all of that. But the vandalism, it doesn't tend to be the kids that are at the school that do the vandalism. It tends to be people that come in. And so we have actually created, we've got our Green Tree Schools Award, which so schools plant trees with us, and then they come on kind of like a learning journey with us, and they do lots of challenges and activities around woods and trees to kind of instill in them this love of the environment and nurturing of the trees. So that's kind of one way that we've tried to counteract that, because it tends to be like big brothers and big sisters that come in and damage the trees. So if you can get that engagement with the kids in the school, they sort of spread that out into the community. So that's one way that we try to address it.
Interesting. Okay. Any more questions? If not, thanks again, Wendy. That was really, really interesting and really nice to see some really good progress and more to dive into that data. But we're looking at opening more questions and answers as always with good data. But that's exactly what we want at this stage. So it's great. Okay. So unless anybody else has got any other particular update, the next meeting will be May 14th. Is that, I think, right? So I remember. We've got one possibility for a speaker we're exploring, but if people have ideas and suggestions on what they'd like to talk about, their own ongoing activities or ideas that they have and want to share, do go ahead. And it can be a longer talk like Wendy just gave, but even just a 5-minute of 10-minute brief discussion on some idea. If everyone much you want to use it as a forum for that as well. Okay, great. So I think we'll end there, and very nice to see you all, and see you again.